Charter Local Edition. Brad Pomerance here. We are in Long Beach, and we are joined by a professor from Cal State Long Beach. He is Kevin Wallsten. He teaches political science, and what a year it is. Obviously, these two candidates, they engender tremendous emotion, both positive and negative. So I wanted to ask, all things being equal, if this were a generic Democrat and a generic Republican, where would this race be in your mind?
It would be in a much different spot, I think. If we switched out for two generics, it would probably be where it is now. But I think if you just sort of take the Republican side, this election is supposed to be a very good one for the Republican Party. The reason why is it's a sort of middling economy. We have an incumbent president who's been there for 2 terms.
Although his approvals are rising. A recent poll had him at 58%, which is not terrible. It's actually pretty good.
Really good, yeah. So he's popular, but not historically popular.
Right, well stated.
And normally voters have a kind of penalty they impose on 2-term parties. So the best forecasting models, the ones that people like Nate Silver will do, or you see it on the internet, anything like this, suggest that it should be a slight Republican advantage. Now, actually, we know that Trump is slightly behind right now. Now, why is that? There are all sorts of reasons, but at its core, he's alienated a large chunk of the electorate through some of his comments, and he's run, I think, a pretty poor campaign. Now, on the Democratic side, we could look at this a slightly different way, is Hillary Clinton's ahead, but she's running against a historically unpopular candidate. So why is she so far behind? It's because she's also very unliked. So it's a unique election in a lot of senses.
I want to ask about Mr. Trump and his purported alienation of certain groups. And I want to focus, if we can, on African-American voters and on Latino voters. I think it's fair to say that his comments against Latinos have been more incendiary, whereas his comments vis-a-vis African Americans, not as incendiary, are arguably. His support in the African American community is 1-2%, whereas in the Latino community, he still garners 20%. Why is that? Why is it he is so wildly unpopular amongst African Americans when it's really Latinos that seem to have, been the focus of his ire?
Yeah, the reason why is because he's a Republican. In the end, African Americans don't vote Republican.
But 1% in the polls, 2% in the polls.
Well, if we go
even
back,
Obama, or Romney got more than 1 or 2%.
Well, that's true. Yeah. If we look historically, though, about 94% voted. African Americans voted for Obama.
Who's African American?
Who's African American, but about 92% voted for John Kerry. So it's not wildly surprising that we would get a candidate who's sort of tried as a strategy in many senses to alienate African Americans and Latinos to get a number that low.
But what about Latinos? I think Mr. Romney received somewhere south of 1/3 of Latino voters, is that right? And Mr. Trump is pulling about 1/5, which is obviously worse than Mr. Romney. But one could argue it's surprising he's getting even 20%.
That is a little surprising, actually. Now, no group within the electorate's ever going to be homogenous. The closest thing we have is African Americans. It's hard to know why 20% would still be kind of voting for a Republican candidate who's stated the issue positions on things like immigration like he has, but it's important that immigration is not always the most important issue to voters. There's this tendency to sort of equate immigration with Latino immigration, and in particular undocumented immigration from Mexico. Trump has been very harsh on the question of undocumented immigration, but that doesn't matter to all voters, and it doesn't matter to all Latinos. Things like the economy, things like issue positions on foreign policy and trade can also be important to voters.
I want to talk about younger voters. Younger voters have tended to vote Democratic. As I understand it, Mrs. Clinton is doing better than Mr. Trump with younger voters, but not to the same degree that Mr. Obama had, Mr. Kerry had, Mr. Gore had, her husband had. Why? I mean, she is arguably a transformative candidate being a woman. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, just to sort of specify the scope of the problem she's facing, Obama won millennials by 30%. She's only winning by 15%. Millennials are about 10% of the electorate. She needs to do much better in order to win the election. So why? It's a little bit mysterious as to why she would be doing so poorly. We tend to think of millennials and younger voters as being more liberal. They've been drawn to some of the third-party candidates in a way that has been surprising.
Sure.
So I'm not sure we know why. The big question will be on Election Day, whether those young voters who are expressing support for third parties in polls actually vote third party in the actual election.
We also see that Mr. Trump is struggling with blue-collar whites. That has been an area where, let me say it differently. He's actually doing all right with blue-collar whites.
Right.
It's the white-collar whites he is struggling with.
Yes.
And that is an area where he needs to do much better. Is that fair, sir?
That is fair, 100%. So every election since 1956, college-educated whites have voted for the Republican candidate in the majority. Trump is now doing very poorly. Partly that's a function of the fact that women don't like Donald Trump very much, and most college graduates now are women. This has been a profound shift.
You would know as a professor.
I would know as a professor, yeah. So about 60% of current college students are female. So you have a shift in who exactly constitutes white-collar whites. But his issue positions, I think, sort of run counter to the ideals of most educated whites, and so he's losing them, and he needs to win them in order to win the election.
At the same time, let me say it correctly, Mr. Trump is doing quite well with blue-collar whites, which one could argue seems counterintuitive in that blue-collar suggests lower socioeconomic status, which the Democrats tend to focus upon more. Am I saying it correctly, sir?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So what Trump has been able to do, the only reason he's successful is he's actually attracting and he's increasing his support amongst blue-collar, uneducated white voters, primarily in the Midwest and South. He's done this primarily through his immigration policies. And it's not that his immigration policies are popular, they're actually not. It's that immigration has become a kind of symbolic issue for most voters. It's a symbol of corruption, a symbol of how the elites have forgotten about them.
And I want to talk about that, sir, because it's very easy for us on the coast to write off Mr. Trump's economic populist message. And I think we do that at our peril. Because the reality is, sir, whatever one thinks about Mr. Trump, he is tapping into something that is palpable. And that is people feel left behind. People feel as if they are not participating in the wealth of this nation.
That's right. Yeah, and there's data to back this up. So there was a recent report detailing economic growth over the last 8 years. And
it's been
economic
very
growth
strong.
has been strong depending on where you live. So if you look at the urban centers, big cities, where actually the vast majority of the American public lives, economic growth has been high. In the rest of the country, rural areas, there's actually been economic decline, meaning that the size of the economy has shrunken, unemployment's gone up, real wages have dropped.
And arguably, if you just look at the positions that the parties take, the Democrats presumably would be offering more relief to those in rural areas. But yet Mrs. Clinton has not been able to break through.
She hasn't been
on
able
that
to,
with that population.
On that issue, yeah. And part of that may be a function of just targeting and demographics. And the Democratic Party has really tried to appeal to multiple constituencies at once. They've really tried to appeal to Latinos. They've really tried to appeal to Asian Americans. They've really tried to appeal to African American voters. It's hard to sort of come up with a message and a platform that appeals to all voters at once. You know, both the parties are big tent parties, and they try to appeal to a large number of voters.
But has the Republican Party, has their tent shrunk under the Trump candidacy, in your mind?
That's a question to be determined. We've seen sort of long-term trends. I don't want to overstate Trump's uniqueness in this way. He's really kind of accelerating trends that have been going on in the country for the last 10 or 20 years. So I think the party will get a little smaller under Trump. That's the big concern. A lot of Republicans are concerned, for instance, that he's going to hurt them in Senate races and other kinds of down ballot contests. We'll see if that happens.
See what happens.
Yeah.
He is Kevin Wallsten. He is a professor at Cal State Long Beach. My name is Brad Pomerance. It's Charter Local Edition.